They left her out there to die. Not fast, not loud, just slow and quiet, under the unforgiving sun of the West. A man, hardened by loss and pain, finds her years later, broken but alive. What happened next didn't just change her story. It tore apart his whole life, dragging them both into a fight for survival, hope, and freedom no one ever gave them. Tell us where you're watching this video in the comments below, and if you believe in stories of resilience and the unbreakable human spirit, hit that subscribe button. Now, hold tight. This is the story of the West you haven't heard before. They left her there. Just like that. Tossed out like garbage no one wanted to claim. Out in the merciless desert heat where the sun don't just burn. It roasts every inch of skin and soul until all that's left is brittle bones and broken hope. I was the one who found her. I don't remember the exact moment I saw her. Not at first. All I knew was that the quiet around my ranch felt wrong. Too quiet, like the kind of silence before a storm breaks. The heat was already thick in the morning air, the kind that presses down on your chest like a heavy weight. Then I saw her, standing by the old fence post that hadn't seen a lick of repair in years, barefoot with her dress soaked and dirty. A burlap sack tied tight over her head, no holes to see through, no mercy given. Her wrists were raw from the rope, deep cuts that told me whoever did this didn't care if she lived or died. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even move much. Just stood there like she was already dead inside, waiting on the sun to finish the job. I couldn't just leave her there. I don't know what made me step down from my horse. Maybe it was something left inside me from a life I thought I'd left behind. A little shred of mercy in a world that forgot how to show it. The sack was tied with hate. Took me a solid 3 minutes to untangle that knot. When it fell away, I saw the scars, not just on her wrists, but on her spirit. 19 years of hell written all over her, silent but screaming louder than any words ever could. I didn't ask her name. Didn't ask where she came from. Didn't ask what hell she'd been dragged through. I just helped her up onto my saddle like she was fragile glass and rode slow back to my cabin. The kind of silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Two broken souls knowing they'd seen too much to pretend otherwise. I poured her water in an old tin cup. She drank it like every swallow was a battle, but not a drop spilled. I cooked a potato, left her the bigger half without a word. She sat wrapped in one of my old blankets by the fire, quiet for nearly 20 minutes. I didn't push. Out here, pushing only makes people shut down tighter. Finally, she whispered, voice cracked and dry like an old riverbed, that men say if you look at her too long, you get cursed. I didn't believe in curses, not like that. To me, it sounded more like cowardice. But I didn't say that out loud. I just watched her, knowing whatever ghosts haunted her past weren't about to leave any time soon. By the next morning, she was hanging my shirts on the line, quiet but steady. She didn't ask to stay, didn't ask to leave. But around here, news travels faster than a rattlesnake strike, and soon the town was buzzing with whispers, rumors of who she was, where she came from. Witch, ghost, Comanche, cursed woman. People said all sorts of things. I didn't care. I had fences to fix, and a girl with rope burns who flinched every time I coughed. Then, just as I thought maybe she could have a chance, 2 men rode in from the South Road. No greetings, no smiles, just cold eyes that said they'd come to take something back. I knew then the past she ran from wasn't done chasing her yet. That night, the wind carried a cold promise, one I'd come to know too well over the years. When those men rode up, it wasn't just about a woman. It was about old debts, old sins, and the kind of cruelty that never really fades, only waits for a chance to strike again. They sat on their horses like they owned the land, tall, quiet, wearing the kind of silence that made the hair on your neck stand straight up. I stood on my porch, shotgun resting heavy in my hands, though I didn't lift it. No need yet. The woman inside, the one I'd found left for dead, went still as stone. Her hands trembled, her eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost she thought was gone for good. The taller one tipped his hat, his voice low and sharp like a knife scraping bone. "Looking for a girl," he said. "Red hair. Where's the sack?" I didn't blink. "Haven't seen her." The other one laughed low, the kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "She limps," he said. "Pretty, if you can get past the silence inside." I could see her holding her breath, gripping the table like it might float her away from this nightmare. I stepped down off the porch, calm as a sunrise, and said, "She ain't here. You can ride on." The first man's voice dropped, dark as the night outside. "She ain't yours to keep now." That was the line that struck the ground between us like thunder. "She ain't anyone's to keep," I said. "She's not cattle. She's not property. She's a person." They didn't press further that night, just turned their horses and disappeared into the black. But the way they looked back, like shadows stretched and twisted with promises, told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Inside, the woman didn't cry, didn't speak. She sat by the fire holding a hawk feather she'd found earlier by the fence, fingers tracing the fragile plume like it might carry her pain away. Funny how feathers always show up after storms, like a sign you're about to survive something hellish. Her voice was barely there when she finally spoke again. "They'll come back." I nodded slowly. Maybe they would. But I wasn't about to let them take her without a fight. The next morning was different. She wasn't hiding anymore. Didn't flinch when I handed her my old boots. Didn't shy away when I told her to walk the fence line. She was quiet, steady, a ghost learning how to be human again. When I asked if she wanted to stay, she didn't say yes. Just, "I'm tired of running." And that, right there, was the beginning of something neither of us dared to hope for. For a long time, the nights were the hardest. Every creak, every shadow made her jump. But she learned to breathe through it. Learned that not every sound meant the end. I didn't ask questions. I didn't push. Some wounds take longer to show themselves than others, and some stories are too heavy to tell until you're ready to carry them. The town kept talking, whispering, but no one dared come near the ranch after dark. Rumors circled like vultures. Some said she was cursed, others that she was a witch who'd brought bad luck on Ridgerist. I saw it all in her eyes, the weight of being hunted not just by men, but by the world itself. Then one day, a wagon came down the trail. Slow, tired. Inside was a woman I hadn't seen before, her dress faded and shoes cracked, a child asleep on her lap. She stepped down and looked at the girl with a whisper that seemed to carry the ghosts of Texas long gone. "I was with you before," she said. "Before they split us." The girl didn't cry, didn't run, just helped her down, cradled the child, and led them inside like it was the first place she ever felt safe. That night, I opened the barn door wide and pointed to the loft. "There's room," I said. And just like that, our ragged little family started to form, not with grand speeches or promises, but with people who'd been thrown away deciding they weren't done yet. She started fixing up the old south room. The woman stitched quilts from canvas and worn shirts. The girl planted herbs near the cotton tree, hands gentle with new life. The kids, I didn't even know they were kids at first, sorted nails by size and sang when they thought no one was listening. Spring came, and the town stopped whispering. Some folks waved when we passed by. Some left canned peaches on the porch. No one asked questions anymore. She never wore that sack again. But one afternoon she pulled it from the drawer, walked to the edge of the pasture, and hung it from the fence. "Let the wind take it." I watched from the porch, knowing that sack wasn't just fabric. It was the weight of every ugly thing she'd been forced to carry. And now she was letting it go. Out here in the West, no one owns another person. No matter what they say. No matter how hard they try to steal your soul, your freedom. Sometimes, the strongest people aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones who get back up when the whole world says don't bother. They don't ask permission to matter. They just do. The mornings came slow but steady after that. The kind where the sun stretches its fingers over the horizon and the world still feels raw, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break or mend. We lived in the space between those moments. She didn't say much. Not at first. But I saw it in the way she moved. Cautious, like every step was a negotiation with the ghosts that haunted her. The rope burns on her wrists weren't just scars. They were maps of a past she couldn't outrun. I spent my days fixing fences, checking the horses, and keeping the shadows at bay. But at night, the quiet inside that cabin told its own story. The fire cracked and hissed like it knew the secrets, and sometimes I'd catch her staring into it, eyes glazed, somewhere far away. She was healing, slow, like a desert flower pushing through cracked earth after a long drought. One morning, I found her kneeling by the cotton tree, hands buried deep in the dirt. She was planting something green, herbs, I guessed. Life in a place that had seen too much death. It struck me then, how she was trying to take something broken and make it whole again, like she was carving a space where pain couldn't reach. It wasn't just the physical wounds either. I saw the walls she'd built, the silence she carried like armor. I wasn't the kind of man who talked about feelings. Hell, I'd lost too many people to even know how to begin. But sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. There were nights when I woke to the sound of her breathing shallow and fast, like she was running from something that wasn't there anymore, but still felt all too real. I'd watch her from the doorway, wishing I could shield her from the past, knowing damn well some things don't get fixed with shotgun shells or sweat. The town had its own rhythm now, one of cautious acceptance. No more whispers at the saloon, no more sideways glances at the market. But that didn't mean the danger was gone, because one afternoon, as I was patching a fence near the south boundary, I saw them, 3 riders, dust clouds rising behind them, eyes cold and sharp. They weren't here for a friendly visit. I didn't warn her. Didn't need to. She saw them too, the way her body tensed, the way she slowed her breath. The past had come riding back, and this time, it wasn't alone. They rode up without a word, the tallest one dismounting with a slow, deliberate motion. His eyes were the kind that knew fear but never showed it. He looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the one holding something he wanted. "We're here for her," he said, voice flat and certain. "She belongs with us." I felt the weight of every lost brother, every burned-down house, every scar stitched into my skin from a life hardened by loss. But this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about the girl who had found a glimmer of something like hope in this hellhole of a place. "She ain't nobody's property," I said, voice low but steady. "She's free." The man laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the dry air like a whip. "You don't know what she carries inside. She's a curse. You'll regret standing in our way." I tightened my grip on the shotgun slung over my shoulder. "Try me." They didn't answer, just turned and rode off, dust swallowing them whole. But that night, the air felt heavier. The fire seemed smaller. And the girl, the woman who'd come back from the edge, sat closer to the embers than ever before. I knew this was just the beginning. Trust was still a fragile thing between us. She'd flinch at sudden noises, her eyes darting to every shadow. But slowly she let me in, not with words, but with small moments. The way she'd lean against the porch after a long day, the quiet steadiness in her movements. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting to live. One night, as the moon hung low and silver, I found her staring at the stars, whispering a name I didn't know. A name wrapped in pain and hope all at once. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. That whatever demons chased her, they wouldn't take her without a fight. But all I could do was sit beside her, quiet as the night, and let the firelight dance between us. Because in the end, sometimes the strongest kind of healing comes not from words, but from simply showing up. Standing by someone's side when the world wants to tear them apart. And that's what I promised myself I'd do, no matter what came next. The sun rose like a judge's gavel, sharp, unforgiving, but there was something different about that morning. Not just the usual heat that baked the earth and left the sky cracked and raw. No, that day carried a weight you could feel pressing down on your chest, the kind of weight that makes you squint into the horizon and wonder if anything's really going to change or if it's all just the same damn story playing out in a loop. I found her by the cotton tree, as usual, but this time she wasn't planting herbs. She sat on the rough dirt, knees pulled close, staring at nothing and everything all at once. Her eyes held a kind of quiet storm, one I didn't dare touch because some wounds don't want to be healed, at least not on your timeline. We had been sharing this space, this ragged, broken place, for weeks now. The kind of place where two lost souls learn to exist side by side without needing to explain what got them there. She trusted me a little more, I think. Not enough to speak about the past, but enough to let me hold the silence with her. It was the kind of trust born in places where hope is scarce and survival is the currency of the day. But that morning, the past showed up like a bad omen. The dust on the south road stirred again, darker and more determined this time. 3 riders came up slow, heavy with purpose, their eyes scanning the horizon like predators tracking a wounded animal. I didn't need to tell her. She knew. The look she gave me was sharp, fierce. It was the same look I'd seen the day I found her by the fence. The same look that said she was done running but ready to fight if she had to. The tallest rider dismounted, spurs jangling softly in the morning quiet. His eyes were hard, cold like the steel he carried. I could see the name burned into his stare even before he spoke. Grant Teller. A name whispered in border towns and saloons, carrying a trail of broken lives behind it. "We're taking her back," Teller said, voice flat and heavy as a tombstone. I didn't hesitate. "She ain't going nowhere but with me." Teller smirked like he thought this was a game. "You don't understand what she's carrying. She's cursed. Dangerous. She belongs to the men who paid for her." The word cursed hung in the air like a poison. But I wasn't buying it. No one owns another person out here. Not anymore. "She's a survivor," I said, voice low, my hand tightening around the shotgun handle. "Not your property." Teller stepped closer, lips curling into a cruel grin. "You think you're protecting her? You're just delaying the inevitable." They turned their horses slowly and left without another word, but the chill they left behind settled in the bones. That night, I found her sitting on the porch, the hawk feather clutched tight in her hand. She whispered, "They'll come again. And next time, they won't be alone." The weight of those words settled between us like a storm cloud ready to burst. But something had shifted. She wasn't the broken girl I'd found months ago. No. She stood taller, walked steadier. The rope burns on her wrists were scars now, marks of a past she refused to let define her future. We started fixing up the old south room together. I brought down boards, nails, and tools from the barn. She worked alongside me, her hands steady and sure, planting hope with every nail hammered, every patch sewn. Sometimes she'd pause and glance at the horizon, like waiting for a ghost to arrive. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she pulled out an old, worn photograph from a pocket I hadn't noticed before. The edges were frayed, the image faded. A woman and a child, smiling despite the dirt and hardship. "Family," she said quietly, eyes distant. "Lost to a world that didn't care." I didn't ask more. Didn't want to dredge up the ghosts she was ready to bury. But I made a silent promise to fight for whatever little piece of peace we could carve out in this wild, unforgiving land. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch slowly came alive again. The horses gained weight, the fences stood straighter, and the fire in the hearth burned warmer. Yet, every shadow still held the threat of the past, lurking and waiting. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, I found her sitting near the fire, humming a song I didn't know. Her voice was soft but steady, a melody of survival and quiet strength. I sat beside her, the silence between us filled not with fear but a fragile kind of hope. Because out here, in the endless dust and heat, sometimes that's all you have, a spark, and you hold on to it with everything you've got. It wasn't just the dust and heat that made this place unforgiving. It was the way the past clings to you, like a stubborn shadow refusing to let go. I'd thought the worst was behind us, but I was wrong. It was only just beginning to show its teeth. The days grew longer, and with them came a silence that didn't feel like peace. The kind of silence that screams under your skin, waiting for something to break it. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of fear she tried to hide, the way she'd tense when the wind shifted or a distant hoof-beat echoed over the hills. She was learning to live again, sure, but the ghosts from her past weren't done hunting her yet. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the jagged ridges, I caught her staring out toward the south road. Her jaw clenched tight, hands curled into fists. I didn't say anything. Some battles aren't won with words. I remembered the first time I met her, that broken girl tied to the fence, left for dead in the merciless Mojave sun. She was a ghost then, a soul worn thin by cruelty and silence. Now, she was something else. A survivor, a fighter. But even fighters have their limits. The sound of hooves snapping through the dry brush caught my attention before the riders appeared. 3 men, dust-coated and quiet, eyes like hard stones, riding with a purpose I knew too well. Grant Teller led them, his face as cold and unforgiving as ever. Behind him, the other 2 flanked like wolves circling a wounded prey. They dismounted without ceremony, boots thudding against the cracked earth. The tallest one stepped forward, eyes narrowing on me. "We're here to take her back," Teller said, voice low and dripping with menace. "She belongs with us. You're just in the way." I met his gaze steady, shotgun resting against the porch railing, ready but not raised. "She belongs to no one." Teller sneered. "You don't understand what she carries inside. That girl is cursed. She'll bring ruin to anyone who stands in her way." The word cursed was thrown like a weapon, but I saw the truth behind Teller's words. Not some supernatural affliction, but the real curse of a brutal past, chains forged by cruelty and violence. I squared my shoulders. She's a person, and she's free. The threat hung thick in the air, heavy as the desert heat. For a moment, no one moved. Then Teller spat on the ground. Glaring like this was a battle he intended to win. But he and his men turned away, mounting their horses with slow, deliberate movements. The dust swallowed them whole as they rode off, leaving behind the echoes of a fight far from over. That night, the wind howled like a beast outside the cabin. She sat near the fire, hawk feather in hand, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "They'll come back," she whispered. "And next time, it won't be just them." I didn't try to comfort her. Sometimes, words aren't enough. Sometimes, you just sit with someone in their darkness. Over the following days, the ranch became a fortress. Fences reinforced, windows boarded, every creak and shadow watched with wary eyes. She worked alongside me, steady and silent. Her hands no longer trembled when they gripped tools or tended the horses. The rope burns on her wrists had faded, but I knew the scars inside ran deeper than skin. One afternoon, as we patched a hole in the barn wall, she pulled out that old photograph again, the faded image of a woman and child smiling through hardship. "Family," she said softly. "They tried to tear us apart. But I remember." I nodded without words. Some memories are too heavy for talk. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land, I realized we were no longer just two broken souls surviving. We were fighting to reclaim something stolen. Hope, freedom, a future. But the night held secrets, and the storm was gathering. The nights had grown restless. The desert wind no longer whispered secrets, it screamed warnings. After that day when Teller and his men rode off, I could feel it in my bones. The calm was just a pause before the storm. She didn't say much, but I knew what haunted her. The shadows in her eyes deepened, and the silence between us thickened like a fog that refused to lift. One evening, just as the sun bled out behind the mountains, a shot cracked through the quiet. Sharp and sudden, it shattered the fragile peace we'd fought to build. I sprang to my feet, shotgun in hand, heart hammering like a drum in a war march. "Stay inside," I told her, voice low but steady. She didn't argue. I heard the soft shuffle of her footsteps retreating to the cabin. The night stretched long and dangerous. I crept to the edge of the property, scanning the dark horizon with eyes trained by years of hard living. The rattling of dry brush told me they were close. Teller and his men were back. Not alone this time. I counted 6 riders, all riding hard and silent as death. They circled the ranch like wolves stalking their prey, eyes burning with a cold hunger. The firelight from the cabin threw flickering shadows, but I knew it wouldn't hold them back. I loaded the shotgun, every movement deliberate, every breath steady. The past and present collided in a brutal dance. The girl I'd saved, the demon she ran from, and the man I'd become. I wasn't about to let her slip away again. The night exploded into chaos. Gunshots rang out, shouts echoed across the land, and the horses stampeded, kicking up dust and dirt like a storm on the plains. I fought with every ounce of strength left in me, pushing back against the tide of darkness closing in. She emerged from the cabin, steady and unafraid, despite the fear burning in her eyes. Together, we stood shoulder to shoulder, fighting for the life we'd dared to reclaim. When dawn finally broke, the riders were gone, but the scars, both seen and unseen, ran deep. We tended wounds in silence, words unnecessary between two souls who'd survived hell together. The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding and watching the horizon for the next storm. But in the quiet moments, I saw something new in her eyes. A flicker of hope, a spark of strength. The fire that had nearly been snuffed out was burning brighter, and I knew, whatever came next, we would face it together. Because out here, in the unforgiving West, sometimes survival means more than just living. It means fighting for every broken piece of yourself until you're whole again. The dawn didn't come like a salvation. It came heavy, draped in the stillness of exhaustion and the ghosts left behind by a long night of gunfire and desperation. The fire was low, the embers barely glowing, but the ache in my bones felt like the weight of the world had settled there to stay. She sat on the porch, shoulders tense but face turned to the sun as if soaking in every last ray before the coming shadows. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck like grit in my throat. There was a silence between us, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of two souls who'd been pulled through hell and were trying to find a way back to something that might still be called life. The morning after the raid, I could see the cracks beneath her strength. The way she flinched when a branch snapped underfoot. The way her eyes darted to the horizon every time a breeze stirred the dry leaves. But she didn't break. Not completely. That was something only I'd earned the right to see. The faintest flicker of defiance, the spark of a fight that wouldn't die. We moved slow, like two old ghosts learning to walk in a world that had forgotten their names. The ranch was battered, the fences broken in places, the barn door hanging crooked on rusty hinges. But we worked without complaint, hammering nails, patching holes, hauling water, reclaiming the place one splinter at a time. She started talking in small ways, not about the past, but about the simple things. The herbs she planted by the cotton tree, the way the horses calmed when she was near, the birds that had begun nesting in the broken rafters. It was those little moments that carved a space for something new, something like hope. One afternoon, while we were hauling wood, I caught her watching me. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but with a quiet kind of trust. It made me remember the man I used to be, before the pain, before the loss. The man who once believed there was more to this world than dust and sorrow. But those memories were fragile, like the cracked glass of a window in a storm. That night, under a blanket of stars that stretched like a promise across the sky, I told her about my past. Not everything, just enough. About the brother I buried too young, the fire that took a home and almost took me too, the woman I lost who once called me something like love. She listened, eyes steady, understanding in the silence between my words. In return, she shared a piece of her story. Not the whole thing, but a glimpse, a shard of the pain she'd carried alone for so long. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Because sometimes, healing begins with the courage to be seen, scars and all. The days grew warmer, the wildflowers blooming in bursts of color against the dusty land. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. But the past has a way of catching up. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, 3 figures appeared on the ridge, shadows against the dying light. Teller and his men. They came with guns drawn, faces set in cold determination. But we were ready. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a fortress. We met them with fire and steel, every shot a promise that we weren't giving up. The fight was brutal, a dance of survival played out under a sky dark with smoke and fear. But in the chaos, something changed. The girl who'd once been left to die stood tall, fighting with a fierce grace I hadn't known she possessed. The woman who'd been silent for so long found her voice in the thunder of gunfire. When the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Teller and his men were gone, beaten back but not broken. We didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because we knew this was only the beginning of a war for our lives. But for the first time in a long time, we felt something like victory, and the fire inside us burned brighter than ever. The days after the fight felt heavy, like the earth itself was bruised and aching under the relentless sun. The ranch, once silent except for the quiet hum of life, now carried the weight of battle. The broken fences, the scars in the land, the blackened marks near the barn door, all spoke of a fight that had been more than just gunfire. It was a war for survival, for freedom, for a future neither of us had dared to imagine in months, maybe years. She moved around the ranch with a strength I hadn't seen before, not just physical but something deeper, forged in the fires of pain and resilience. Every scar on her skin, every shadow in her eyes told a story of a past no one should have to live through. But it was those stories, silent and heavy, that made her who she was, unbreakable even when the world tried its hardest to shatter her. One evening, as the light faded and the sky turned the color of bruises, I found her sitting by the cotton tree. The herbs she planted had grown wild and green, a sharp contrast to the dry dust beneath. She was holding that same worn photograph, the one with the faded faces of a woman and a child, the fragments of a family torn apart by violence and loss. She looked up at me then, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I thought I lost them forever," she said softly. "But they're still here, in this dirt, in this land. Maybe this place can hold the pieces we can't find anywhere else." Her words hit me harder than any bullet, because I knew the feeling, the ache of losing everything, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something left to hold on to. We sat in silence as the stars blinked awake above us. The night air was thick with the scent of sage and something raw, something unspoken between us. That night we talked, not about the past, but about what we wanted. About a life that wasn't ruled by fear or shadows. About hope. It felt like a fragile dream, but sometimes fragile is all you need to keep going. The days that followed were a blur of work and quiet moments, repairing fences, tending the horses, planting more herbs and flowers around the property. The ranch began to feel like home, not just a place to survive. But the past was never far behind. One afternoon, as the sun beat down hard on the land, a rider appeared on the horizon, alone, steady, moving with purpose. I felt my heart tighten. Teller's men had learned to pick their battles, to test their prey before the final strike. The rider was a warning. That night, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. We sat by the fire, the silence between us heavy but comfortable, a shield against the coming storm. She looked at me then, eyes steady and sure. "I'm not running any more," she said. I nodded, knowing the fight ahead would test everything we had built. The next days were a waiting game, every shadow a threat, every sound a reminder of what was to come. And then it did. The second raid came like a storm, sudden, fierce, relentless. Teller and his men, reinforced and angrier, rode into the night with fire in their eyes and death in their hands. The fight was brutal. Gunfire shattered the silence, horses screamed, and the land itself seemed to cry out under the violence. But we stood firm. She fought beside me, every movement fierce and precise, a wild force born of pain and hope. When the dust settled, the cost was clear. The ranch was scarred deeper, and so were we. But something had changed. We weren't just fighting to survive. We were fighting to live, to reclaim what had been stolen, to build something stronger than the darkness that chased us. In the quiet after the storm, as we tended wounds and rebuilt fences, I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire I'd seen when I first found her tied to that fence, left to die under the cruel sun. But now, that fire burned with purpose, with hope, with a promise that no matter what came next, we wouldn't back down. Because in a world that tried to break us, we chose to rise. And that made all the difference. The land held its breath, and so did we. It was the kind of silence that felt like a warning, a heavy, oppressive quiet that wrapped around the ranch like a noose. The morning sun painted the world in gold and fire, but beneath that beauty lay a storm waiting to break. Every rustle of dry grass, every distant caw of a raven was a reminder that the past wasn't done with us yet. She sat by the porch, her eyes tracing the horizon with a sharpness that spoke of a soul forged in fire. The scars on her wrists, once fresh and raw, were now weathered reminders of the cruelty she'd endured. But those scars were more than wounds. They were a testament to her survival, to a strength few could understand. I watched her for a long time, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through settled deep in my chest. The man I was before this ranch, before her, felt like a distant memory, a shadow of a life I'd buried in dust and regret. But with her, with this fight, I found something worth holding on to. The days blurred into each other, filled with hard work and harder silences. The land demanded everything, sweat, blood, and a stubborn will to keep fighting. We patched fences with hands raw from toil, tended the horses as they slowly regained their strength, and rebuilt the broken corners of the cabin that had become our sanctuary. But the shadows grew longer each day. The men who hunted her didn't forget. They waited, watched, and planned in the darkness. Their threats were like whispers carried on the wind, growing louder with each passing night. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. His approach was slow and deliberate, the dust swirling behind his horse like a curtain of fate. I could feel the tension coil tight in my gut. He was a messenger, a warning wrapped in leather and gunpowder. His voice was cold as the desert night. "Grant Teller says he's coming. Soon." The words settled over us like a death sentence. That night, the fire burned low, the embers flickering shadows on the worn faces of two survivors bound by pain and hope. We sat close, the silence between us filled with things left unsaid. She looked at me then, eyes steady but fierce. "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "Not anymore." Her words were a promise, a challenge, a beacon in the darkness. The days that followed were a tense waiting game. Every sound was a potential threat, every shadow a lurking danger. We moved cautiously, repairing the damage left by the last raid and preparing for the war we knew was coming. When the night finally arrived, it came like a storm unleashed from hell. Grant Teller and his men rode into the ranch with fury in their eyes and death in their hands. The sky cracked with gunfire, the earth trembling beneath the chaos. But we stood our ground. She fought like a wild storm, every move fierce and precise, a force born of pain and resilience. I stood beside her. Every shot fired a promise that we wouldn't go quietly into the night. The battle raged on, brutal and unrelenting. When the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Teller and his men were beaten back but not broken. The cost was high. The land was scarred, and so were we. But we had something they didn't: hope. In the quiet after the fight, as we tended to wounds both seen and unseen, I saw the fire in her eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished. It was a fire born not just of survival, but of the fierce determination to reclaim a life stolen from her. We were no longer just two broken souls trying to survive the harshness of the West. We were warriors fighting for every broken piece of ourselves, building something stronger than the darkness that chased us. And as the first light of dawn touched the cracked earth, I knew, whatever came next, we would face it together. Because sometimes, in a world built on pain and loss, the strongest thing you can do is choose to keep fighting. And that choice, it makes all the difference. The wind carried a bitter chill that evening, creeping across the ranch like an uninvited shadow. The sun had long dipped beneath the horizon, leaving a bruised sky and a silence that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something that couldn't be stopped. I sat on the porch, the shotgun resting across my knees, eyes scanning the dark edges of the land. She was inside, tending the fire, moving with a quiet grace that had become a rhythm of our survival. Months had passed since I found her tied to that fence, left to die under the cruel desert sun. Months filled with fear, pain, fighting, and slowly, fragile hope. The girl who once flinched at every sudden noise, who held silence like a shield, had become a woman forged in fire. Not unbroken, no, but unyielding. Every scar, every shadow in her eyes, told a story, stories I'd come to know without needing words. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were reclaiming. But the past isn't a ghost that leaves quietly. It's a storm that never stops coming. The threat of Grant Teller and his men had hung over us like a dark cloud, growing heavier with every day. They came for her once, twice, each time with more fury, more hate. We fought back, with fire and steel, with every ounce of grit left in our bones. The land bore the marks of those battles, shattered fences, scorched earth, and the bitter taste of loss. That night, the wind whispered promises of the coming storm. I felt it deep in my gut. Teller wasn't done. He'd return with everything he had. We spent days preparing, fortifying the ranch, patching broken boards, and setting traps in the brush. She worked alongside me, hands steady and sure, every movement a testament to the fight inside her. But beneath that strength, I saw the flicker of fear she never spoke aloud, a quiet reminder of the price we might have to pay. One evening, as the sky blazed with stars, she pulled the faded photograph from her pocket. The faces of a woman and child stared back at us, ghosts of a past stolen by cruelty. "I want them to know," she said softly, "that I survived." I didn't have words for that kind of courage. I just nodded, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. The night before Teller's return was restless. The fire flickered low, shadows dancing on the walls like ghosts of battles yet to come. We sat side by side, the silence between us speaking volumes. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady but quiet. So was I. When the dawn cracked the sky open, the storm came, brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. Teller rode in with a fury I'd never seen, his men at his heels, a tide of hate and violence crashing down on us. The ranch became a battleground. Shots echoed through the air, horses screamed, and the earth shook beneath the fury. But we stood tall. She fought like the wind, wild, fierce, unstoppable. Every movement was a declaration that she was more than a victim, more than a shadow. I fought beside her, every bullet a promise that we would not be broken. Hours passed like minutes in that chaos. Blood mixed with dust and sweat, but we never faltered. When the final shot rang out and the dust settled, Teller lay defeated, his men scattered like shadows fleeing the dawn. The cost was high. The land was scarred deeper than before, and so were we. But in that moment, we were free, not just from them, but from the past that had tried to chain us. We stood on the cracked earth, battered and bleeding, but unbowed. The sun rose on a new day, a day carved from pain and resilience. She looked at me then, eyes fierce and bright. We survived, and in that simple truth, everything else fell into place. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't just fought with guns. They're fought in the quiet moments of courage, in the decision to rise again and again. We had chosen to matter, to live, to be more than what the world had tried to make us. And that made all the difference. The morning broke cold and unforgiving. The wind cut through the broken edges of the ranch like a razor, carrying the dust of battles past and the weight of the battles yet to come. I stood on the porch, shotgun resting heavy in my hands, the sun rising behind me casting long, hard shadows across the land. She was inside, moving quietly, more a ghost of strength than a fragile woman, her eyes steady, ready. I could feel it in her bones, in the stiff set of her jaw. This was it. Months of running, hiding, fighting, of clawing back life from the edge of despair, had led us to this moment. The land around us was a scarred testament to everything we had endured. Fences broken and rebuilt, trees bent but not broken, the soil soaked with sweat and blood. But more than the land, we were changed, hardened, tested, tempered like steel in fire, and stronger. The past had stalked us like a predator, relentless and cruel. Grant Teller and his men, the shadows that haunted her nightmares, had come back again and again, each time more vicious, more desperate to claim what they thought was theirs. But this time, it wasn't just about running or surviving. This time, it was about standing firm and ending it, once and for all. She joined me on the porch, the morning sun catching the edges of her face. Her hands were steady as she took the shotgun from me, her fingers curling around the worn wood. "Let's finish this," she said, voice calm but fierce. I nodded, knowing there were no second chances left. No more running. No more hiding in the shadows. We moved through the ranch like ghosts of war, silent but ready. The horses were restless, sensing the storm too. The wind whispered warnings through the trees. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the rumble of hooves grew louder, their return inevitable. When Teller's men came over the rise, they were like a flood, dark, angry, merciless. The morning exploded into chaos. Gunfire tore through the quiet. The earth shook with the pounding of hooves and the thunder of battle. I fought with everything I had. Every bullet fired a promise that this time they wouldn't win. She was beside me, a wild force of nature, fierce and unyielding. Every scar, every wound she bore was fuel for her fire. The girl who had once been left to die was now a warrior, standing tall amid the carnage. Hours blurred into a bloody storm. The air was thick with smoke and grit. The screams of horses and men echoed across the ravaged land. And through it all, we stood firm. We fought not just for ourselves, but for the right to be free, for the right to live beyond the chains of cruelty and fear. When the last shot echoed and silence finally fell, Teller lay defeated, his men scattered, broken in body and spirit. The sun climbed higher, burning away the smoke and shadows. But the cost was etched deep, in broken bones, in scars on skin and soul. The ranch bore the wounds of war, and so did we. We were battered, bleeding, but unbowed. In the quiet aftermath, as the dust settled, I saw something new in her eyes. Not just strength, but peace, a hard-won peace born of survival and defiance. She turned to me, voice soft but certain. We made it. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. We were no longer just survivors or broken pieces trying to hold together. We were whole, scarred, yes, but alive, free. The past would never fully leave us, but it no longer owned us. We had reclaimed our story, written it anew with grit and courage and hope. That day, the West was more than a harsh land of dust and cruelty. It was a place where broken souls could rise, where kindness could take root in barren earth, where two lost people could build a life together from the ashes. As we stood there, wounded but unbroken, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No one owns a soul. No one owns a person. We are more than chains and scars. We are the ones who choose to keep fighting, to keep living, to keep being human. If you were in her place, would you fight the same fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your story. Don't forget to like the video and explore the other videos on screen. The West's tales are never done, and neither are we.